Hello, bonjour, and welcome to the unofficial PopCap PopCast. I'm Steve Notley.
And I'm Isaac Aubrey. And Steve, what is the unofficial PopCap PopCast all about? Can you give it to me in one snappy sentence?
Isaac, I can. The unofficial PopCap PopCast is a podcast about the golden age of PopCap games by two guys who were there and paid to be there at the time.
Indeed. Note the unofficial, which means that we know in no way represent EA or PopCap under EA. We're just two fellas who worked at a cool place and thought folks might want to hear what that was like.
So, Isaac, the title of this episode is Why Is This Happening?
Right. And why are we doing this podcast in the first place, Steve?
So, well, we got plenty to say about that, but first, I thought it might make sense to just tell folks a little bit about ourselves, and also kind of answer that question people often have, like, how do you get a job in a game business? And while we can't really explain, how you get a job, how any person gets a job, what we can do is sort of tell the stories of how we got our jobs. It's kind of a weird thing. Everybody finds their own way in, but we can share our stories. So, Isaac, how did you do it? How did you end up at PopCap, and what's some of the stuff you worked on when you got there?
Well, as I've been thinking about this, there's kind of like the places I worked leading up to that and kind of like how I got in exactly. But I think a really important thing that I hadn't thought about before was basically just playing video games my entire life. In
Of
the
course.
late 70s, I grew up in a house where we got Pong was the first video game that I played indoors. At the same time, Chuck E. Cheese had just opened up, Chuck E. Cheese's, and so I was going over there and playing arcade games all the time. And then we got an Atari 2600, and the Atari 2600 versions of the arcade games just sucked in comparison.
Oh,
So
jeez,
I
yeah.
continued to go to the arcades all the time, all through the 80s. I got a TI 99 at one point and played this game Miner 2049er until I just
I
couldn't
had
play it
Miner
anymore.
2049er for the ColecoVision.
Yes, yes. See, this crazy. Okay, did not know that. And I never talked to anyone else who's ever played Miner 2049er that I remember anyway. So that's cool. Yeah, and then my mom got an early PC. It didn't. Yeah, there's no Windows yet, but I got a text adventure game on it, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the very first flight simulator too, which is all just wireframes chopping along like a frame every 2 seconds or something. It was just agonizing, but it was great at the time. It was the first like 3D representation I'd seen in a game, which is really compelling. Right in 1989, I had a friend who I learned was a game developer, and he didn't really talk about it normally. I knew him for probably 6 months before it ever came up. Like, what do you do? You know, and he was working on a game called New York Warriors on an Amiga, and he had a big arcade screen, a CRT monitor that he pulled out of an arcade cabinet up on a desk in his house, and that's where he had his Amiga plugged into that. And once I learned about that, then I go up and play test for him once in a while, and that was pretty cool. First game dev I ever met. But then, yeah, I worked. I worked numerous shit jobs. I worked construction for about 8 years through the 90s.
So you
Kind of,
actually have like real life skills as well.
yeah, just punishing, horrible, humiliating jobs that just would, give a person nightmares. I did a fair amount of that through, yeah, late 80s, all through the 90s. I did take a break from drywalling. The mid 90s, worked at Fantagraphics Books, which was a very cool comic book
I
warehouse here in Seattle, and then back to construction. But at the end of construction, I hurt my wrist really bad, and I couldn't do it anymore. I had a surgery. I was out of work for a year and a half, and during that time, a friend of mine had gotten a job at Electronic Arts in Bellevue, and in there used to be the racing studio in Bellevue,
okay,
where
okay.
Need for Speed 3 and 2 and High Stakes and all of their racing games were developed. He asked if I wanted a job out there, so
And
I did.
and when was this? Would have been around when
That
you
was
were?
in 2000.
Okay, okay,
So
okay.
it was probably like early 2000, maybe as late as May, but I think it was around March or so that I got my first testing gig, and I came on as a game tester, and there it was really segregated. All the developers were on bottom floor, all the testers were upstairs. We didn't really talk to them that much. I had a buddy who did work on the car models there for the games, so I did have a little bit of like an in on the dev side, but didn't really get to hang out down there that much or know much about it.
Right, right.
And that lasted a year and a half.
Okay, and so EA, because this is something that'll come up later, but like just as we talk about PopCap and the culture, I guess, but you talk about how it was very segregated. It's like the developers are here, and not racially, but like the developers are here, and the QA were over here, and they didn't mix, right? Like
Not really. No, no. And I mean, we'd enter bugs in a database, and if a developer just couldn't understand what was going on or needed to see it in real time, we tried to record everything on VHS tape back then. Back when we were playing the game, we had to have the VCR recording the whole time, and so a lot of times that would capture bugs, but also in a lot of cases the developers would come upstairs and be like, "Yo, how did you do this? Like, show me." And so we kind of get some interaction with them that way, and always really cool folks there. And I worked on the big game there was Motor City Online,
Right,
and I
right.
worked on that for a year and a half. But that was actually where I played and worked on my first web game, which was kind of, I think, part of what might have got me into PopCap too. Is I worked on a Tiger Woods Golf for EA.com web game, and it was a lot of fun actually. And so. Yeah, I worked there for a year and a half, but there was somewhere way up in the echelons of all the powers of EA at the time. Some bad decisions were made, and I know, crazy, and the studio shut down. So then, but a bunch of the testers there went over to Sierra Games, which was still a studio up here in the area at the time. That was like 2002. We went, a bunch of us went over to Sierra. And so then I got a couple different contracts there where that also lasted about a year and a half until somewhere way up on high, some terrible decisions were made and another studio shut down. And so it was kind of, it was kind of demoralizing. I wasn't too excited about the games industry after that. That was about, Sierra finally shut down in the middle, kind of late summer of 2004.
Well, and this is something that like our listeners may not be aware is like unlike say in Hollywood or wherever where you've got studios like Warner Brothers and Paramount and so on that have existed for decades, like like the video games are just sort of organized very differently, and they haven't existed for as long as movies and TV, and the studios shut down all the time. It is a very common thing for like to get a bunch of money together and try to make a video game and maybe even make a video game and then go out of business, like or be part or get bought by somebody bigger and then have them turn around and going, "We're closing your studio." That happens all the time.
Exactly. It's very that's one thing those early years got me used to is the idea of just kind of these ways of development. And it usually was like you would crank on stuff and work tons of overtime and it was exhausting and you just started to feel synthetic after a while, and then it all just like culminated into this big like, and we're going to release it and it's been released and now you're laid off. And there was a time at Sierra where I went from working 80-hour weeks, sometimes even up to 90 hours a week. And just crazy, like, my wife would come and just like hang out at the desk, like, cause she wouldn't get to see me otherwise. It's like I didn't exist anymore. We did that. And we made great overtime, filled the bank account. And then it was that to just like nothing. Then I was just sitting at home. Like, did that just happen? Is this real? Like, and it's weird. You kind of have to reclaim your sense of self and like, oh, I can work on a project that's my project. Like, that's weird. I've been able to do that for the last year, and so it's pretty, being a game tester back then was pretty grueling. It was a lot of fun in a lot of cases, and we made a great time out of it, but it was rough. But it was those experiences that got me to where I could put a resume together that was all game centric, and I put it up on, I think it was monster.com at the time. And
that's what I now I want to like. Let's get you to PopCap. Let's bring me let's walk me in your journey to and through the doors.
And
at
this is
PopCap.
it. Yeah. So I was contacted by a contracting agency, and they're like, "Well, we've got this 3 month contract for you at a little web startup game company in Belltown." And I was like, "Well, I'll do it," And I was like, "God, 3 months, I can pay the bills for 3 more months. That's fantastic." So I was a little cynical at that point, given what had just happened. But I went in and met with them, and yeah, I had a great interview with the head of QA and one of the producers there. And I don't think I met any of the founders at that time, but it was cool. There's probably like 20 people there. We had just a little corner of that building in Belltown at Fourth and Battery.
Right.
And so, yeah, I started my contract there, and with another buddy that came over from Sierra. And it was great, but it was really interesting. 3 months in, there was a quick layoff of a few folks that weren't gelling too well, and it was kind of frightening. But I kind of held on after that, and then it just got more and more awesome to where it
Well,
started flowing.
so was there like a specific point where it's like, well, okay, now we're at the end of the 3 months, we're gonna take you on full time, or was that the sort of culling, or what happened there?
It was interesting. It was 3 months went by, and I'm like, well, I'm still working, what? And then it was like, well, we're going to extend your contract to like 5 months or something like that. And it kept being like little contract extensions for about 6 months from when I walked in the door. And so it was like early 2005 where they pitched a full-time offer at me.
Right, right.
And so yeah, and that's something to be said for, if you can get a little 3 month contract, or you can kind of like just give yourself over to the like, maybe this will work out, maybe it won't, whatever aspect of these things. In a lot of cases, if you stick with it and you do the best you can, like, it does turn into a full-time situation.
So you came in and your role was QA tester.
Yep.
Okay,
That's how
so
it
what's
started.
some of the games you worked on in that role, and then I want to hear like some of the stuff you worked on in that role, and then like how your role changed and what those games would have been, right?
When I first started, it was each PopCap deluxe game that was downloadable and that we would sell came with its web component that was the
Right, right,
upsell web game. And so I first came in working on the ActiveX version of Insane Aquarium.
right, right.
And actually and only did a little bit on that. That was right at the end of its testing cycle. What I really worked on right away was Pixelus, and so I was, I kind of became the flag bearer.
Everybody remembers Pixelus, of course.
Oh,
The most
yeah,
famous PopCap game.
it was a weird one because it was a puzzle game where there was literally there was a point where you couldn't do the puzzle in any fewer moves. Like, there was a peak to it, yet there was a leaderboard for the game.
Yeah.
So it's just like, once people figure out how to do the puzzle in the most efficient way, everyone's got the same score. And it was an odd game to put a leaderboard on. But we were trying different stuff then. It was,
Yeah.
And so I went, worked on Pixelus. I worked on Heavy Weapon was the next game I worked on. That was the first game that I got ran the full gambit on it as a tester, and same with the web version of it. And then Bejeweled 2 was the next one that I put a bunch of time in on.
Right.
And that's when I met, I worked more closely with Brian Feet, one of the founders, and
Sure.
and so it's kind of starting to get a little more into the PopCap family, and that was awesome. Worked on the web version of Bejeweled 2, and then kind of into Chuzzle, and there's a lot of other stuff that kind of came and went then too. Like, we would update the website, and every time the website was updated, in a lot of cases we'd update the games in some way or another, and so we'd have to go through the website and download every game and make sure it runs, and so I look at everything from Typer Shark to whatever else was out there, Atomica.
It is crazy to think about that early, because spoilers, by this time I was also there, and like that early phase of PopCap, which would have been like in the 2005 2006ish era, where, like, again, we would make these games. We'd make the web game and then make the deluxe version. The deluxe version you'd download, you'd pay for, you'd buy it. That's where our money came from. But the web games were, as you say, sort of the portals. Like, people just play the free web game, get into it, and then we go like, hey, download the deluxe version. It's a game you love, except it's awesome. It's $20.
Exactly.
And that we had so many of them. You could just come to PopCap and just play games for free, just like smaller kind of flash. I don't know how many of our listeners would know what Flash is, but yeah,
Really?
and that was such a big part of it for so long. Okay, so keep going. Tell me some more stuff.
Yeah. That and so it was just working on a lot of these little games, and it's funny because when I first walked in the door, I'd worked up, through all the 2D games and the arcade games of the 80s, and I got into first person shooters, Doom and Quake, etc. through the 90s. So and when I worked at EA and Sierra, working on these big 3D games. So I was like, 3D games are awesome, we
Right, right.
finally done it. So when I walk into PopCap, it's like, nah, you can forget about 3D games. We're going back to like, and so it was a little I was like, what is this, but it didn't take long, and I realized like these things are really addictive, and they were getting them up on a lot of different portals. That was a big part of the business too, was like getting them up on MSN games, getting them up on Big Fish games, and
Yep,
getting them,
yep.
just spreading the love as far and wide as possible, and making these partnerships with other casual game companies. And yeah, it really started to hook me in after a while, and get pretty exciting. And then my QA position transitioned into being a producer on games, and I started
Oh,
being the
oh.
producer on the little web games.
Yeah, producer.
Yeah. I finally, and it's a funny story how I came to that. I was working on. I can't remember what game I was working on, but the person sitting next to me was working on Bejeweled Twist, and could not work on it without having the volume turned up, and it drove me insane. It was weird. Like the sound effects of that game drove me absolutely batty, and I was like, I have to sit somewhere else. And they just would not put on headphones. Nope, going to do this with the speakers out. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure there's some Freudian sort of explanation for all that, but my response was to just move out of that whole section and just move down the hall. And I ended up sitting with a couple other developers down there that were working on stuff, and then I got pulled into working uh, onto these little web games, and making the upsell games. Um,
Well, and so one of the big shifts then, and maybe I'm jumping a bit forward, but I don't know, is like eventually we're getting to Bejeweled Blitz, right?
mhm.
Which I think. So tell me a bit about. So am I right? Like, would that be like one of the highlights of your
Yeah, oh,
PopCap career?
absolutely,
So
absolutely. That was kind of going back to the EA and Sierra days. Like whenever we had an all hands meeting, it was infrequent, and it usually came with a lot of bad news. At PopCap, we'd have an all hands meeting every Friday, and it was always good news. It was always like, "Oh, you guys are knocking it out of the park. This is amazing. You're killing it. This is incredible. Here's a bunch of catered food. Go get loaded." And it was just a constant celebration of our awesomeness. And so that had been leading up to this point, and that gets you really engaged in what you're working on. That makes you feel, you've got a real stake in it, and you're excited about it. And so I went and sat with this other crew, and there's an old friend, I still talk to him frequently, named Jason Payne, who had downloaded a trial version of Flash, and used that to crack open a version of a Flash version of Bejeweled 2 that we'd had made, or a couple of years, a year prior.
right, right.
And he took that and reconfigured it to work as Bejeweled Blitz. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the very first version of Bejeweled Blitz. And everyone was really taken by it. And then it was like right at that same time, Facebook was starting to have Flash games
Right.
attached to it.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And so someone got the idea like, hey, let's put this up on Facebook and give it a leaderboard and see what happens. And it exploded. People freaked out, like, oh, this is great, and people are just getting in heated battles weekly. And especially within the company, which is a lot of fun. And so then at the same time, Bejeweled 3 was being worked on. And so the idea came along to integrate this kind of real time gem swapping and all this cool stuff that was happening in Bejeweled 3 into this new Bejeweled Blitz model that we had. And then start to add other stuff in, analytics and power ups, and kind of a lot of the free to play model stuff that has been been so
Which
popular
well,
since then.
and anticipated a lot of that too. I mean, it is crazy as you talk about it. It's like, oh yeah, there was this period where Facebook was a game portal. You would go to
Hmm.
Facebook and you could play games on Facebook, tons of them, and that
Yeah.
was like a huge part of the PopCap business for that for quite some significant amount of time, right?
Yeah.
And
I can.
then and then it sort of pivoted over to the mobile space and the free to play model that we're kind of familiar with still now, right?
Mhm.
Probably 10 years or almost 15 years after that, whereas like the sort of Facebook free games but advertising model turned into the free to play. You download the game on your phone and you do microtransactions kind of thing, which
Mhm.
transformed the business. Uh,
Completely.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so the
Yeah.
crazy to think that we were there, sort of, we saw the microtransactions kind of come in, and we were there for some of the stuff that sort of preceded it. I guess that was sort of trying out some of the things that have eventually become kind of a microtransaction sort of model.
Exactly. Yeah, there was I in hindsight, a lot of the games that we built leading up to that moment were in a sense, kind of honing our casual game development powers, and then when suddenly we could put it in a very like public multiplayer type space, it just suggested so much. And so some of the stuff just kind of like invented itself because it was obvious, that leaderboards, like, like sharing, gloating to your friends that you just,
Right, right.
trounced their score, became like, it's obvious that people want to do that, and have those kind of competitions. So it all just kind of got going there. And then it was like, oh, we need to be able to track some of this stuff. What are people clicking on? What are they doing this? And so then it became like, let's introduce, analytics. And it was really primitive at first, and we kind of hacked it in. And a lot of the stuff was just kind of the seat of our pants. That the whole kind of Facebook blitz uh, team at that, it was like four of us for quite a while, and it was always considered like an experiment. This is an
Right.
experimental group. We don't know what's going to happen here, and it was always that way to the end. It was like, this is just an experiment. Don't start thinking you're going to get paid anymore.
Right.
This is just an experiment. And so definitely set the stage for moving things over to mobile, as you'd pointed out. And it was that where gem swapping on a mobile device on a touch screen is way more satisfying
Right.
and
Then
and
clicking
easy to
on
do.
things, yeah.
And as much as iPhones helped us sell Bejeweled, I feel like Bejeweled Blitz also helped sell iPhones. I think people would wanted to play
Yeah.
games that operated like that. And which, before the iPhone came out, there were iPods going around, and the first iPod that had a screen on it. That was another thing that we did back then. And I've still got an iPod with my name engraved on it here somewhere. In fact, it's sitting right here.
Okay,
Uh,
yeah.
but
Nice.
yeah,
That
September
that may
12th,
not have
2000.
shown up in the cropped version of the image. Like, hold it right up in
Oh,
front of your
yeah, there
face.
we
There we go.
go.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah, one of these old, and you can see the little PopCap logo on the back of it there. But we put Bejeweled on the iPod at one point, and it worked there. You can make these things work anywhere, but yeah, mobile is where and I think that was really also part of the catalyst of other companies like Zynga and boy, whoever else was around at that time doing mobile stuff or doing casual free to play styled games, really saw what we are doing. And we're like, oh, that we've got that. And along comes Candy Crush and other stuff. And there's a lot, so it goes. But
That's quite a lot there. So was that like hitting the high points, or is there anything else you sort of figure you need to
that's there.
to
There's a lot of stories in there that I think we can use this podcast to dig into some of
right,
the juicier, fun moments of all that. But as far as like, boy, that was more than just a high level view of it. That was that was a little more of a deep dive. But yeah, I think that's probably as much as I'd say about how that went at the time. And all of that was a big. We're just building momentum and building power until we could get to this buyout moment. And that was kind of my part in that. That's what I did at PopCap while I was there, and why I have why I feel like I can sit and talk about this stuff and it's relevant at all. But Steve, so let's kind of bounce the ball back in your direction. You have a very interesting story about how you came into PopCap, and I think people are going to want to hear it. Let's spill the beans, sir.
Well, thanks, Isaac. Well, let's see. So, yeah, I mean, I started out playing a lot of video games the way, basically very similar to how you describe. Had a ColecoVision rather than an Atari 2600. But fast forward, went to university, the University of Alberta, in Alberta, Canada. And there I worked at the university newspaper, which is called The Gateway. It was like the student newspaper. And there I met a guy named Jason Kapalka, who also worked at the newspaper. And we became friends. We worked on a couple of screenplays that nobody ever bought. And sort of went our separate ways. I was drawing my cartoon, Bob the Angry Flower. He moved down to San Francisco and started working for, I forget what the company was called when he started with them. He started doing like reviews and strategy guides for video games, and then through that he got an offer and he moved down to San Francisco, and I don't remember what the company was called, but eventually became called 10 Total Entertainment Network. And through there he met the two other founders of PopCap, and so in 2000 they created Bejeweled and started PopCap. And so I always sort of describe PopCap as like the Beverly Hillbillies, where they just they're out shooting food and they just shoot, and like a oil well just spurts up and starts squirting money everywhere or oil everywhere. That
Black
is
gold,
basically yeah. That basically is
Texas
what
tea.
petroleum. And essentially the same thing happened with PopCap. So they started Bejeweled and came up with this idea of, as you said, they had like the web version and people were playing it like crazy. And so they said, okay, let's make a deluxe version. You just download the deluxe version, you play it for an hour, try before you buy, and then you can buy it for, I think it was like 10, $20. And one of the stories was like apparently Brian had set up something where it would just go ching every time somebody made a purchase. And by like late 2000, early 2001, my dates may not be exactly correct on this, but if you went over to Brian's place, you'd just hear pa-ching, 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 pa-ching. It would just be like
That's getting
every
annoying.
every second they were earning like $10. And so PopCap just became this thing where they had this fountain of money, and so they were like, well, let's hire a bunch of people and start making video games. So now at that time, I knew Jason, and I was doing my own stuff. I was cartooning, and so he would ask me to come in and draw like some assets for some of their very early games. So that'd be games like Mummy Maze, Big Money,
Big money.
Tomica. So these are super old school early PopCap games before any of the other hits. Never really did anything for Bejeweled, um, but and I would work on some stuff that never came out. And then around 2004, he said, "Okay, Steve, we need a newsletter editor, and I want you to move to Seattle and be our newsletter editor." um, so, fall of 2004, went down to Seattle, met the dudes. So that would have been like Brian Feet, John Vici, the two other founders, Soup Beer, Sidhu, which is one of the big producers then. I met Brian
Ace.
Ace, quote, Brian Rothstein.
Mm-hmm.
It was an awesome time. Hung out with them, smoked a bunch of dope, watched a bunch of like Michel Gondry music videos. That was right around the time that they were finally sort of honing in on the basic Peggle gameplay, where they had finally sort of figured out, okay, you have X number of balls and you shoot and X number of pegs, and as you hit the pegs, they disappear and all that sort of stuff. It was just like super exciting. I was like, yeah, I'm into this. I moved down to Seattle around 2005 and started as the newsletter editor. Um, but then within a week, two guys, Tyson Henderson and Jeff Weinstein, were working on this sort of not exactly a sequel to a game we had called Bookworm. I guess you could call it a sequel. It wasn't quite the same gameplay, but it was basically like kind of an RPG spelling game. And Jason was like, "Hey, come up with a bad guy for this game. We don't have one yet." And so I thought about it for a little while and came up with a bad guy for the video game. And that sort of started my transition from newsletter editor to basically game writer, which is one of these sorts of weird jobs. Was like, oh, I can write. I want to write for games. How do you do that? And it's like, well, it's a weird path, right?
Make it
And
up as you go
and
along.
most
Yeah.
most games don't really have a role for a writer, or they don't think they do. But in this instance, particularly in the case of Bookworm Adventures, it was like, hey, you've got this character, you play the character on one side, you got the monster you're fighting on the other side, you spell a word, he attacks, the monster attacks you, and you would spell the word on this grid of letters. But every so often when they attack, a little word balloon can pop up over their heads. And so once Jason was like, let's figure out a technology to make word balloons appear. And then it's like, yep, we can make word balloons appear whenever we want. And it's like, okay, Steve, fill those with jokes. So that was my job now. I was like, in addition, so like after, I would do the newsletter, and I moved to Seattle on a TN1 NAFTA visa. So that was like a 1 year visa. You just and it's non-immigration. You have to go there and just say, no, I'm just here for a year. But you can renew it indefinitely. So you have to maintain this pretense that you're not trying to immigrate. Even though you can be there, you could be there for many, many years just on a 1 year NAFTA visa. So yeah, like very quickly, I sort of moved away. Well, I was again still doing the newsletter until eventually they got somebody else to do the newsletter, and now I was just like writing for the game. So there's in games, at least certainly in casual games, there's this notion of flavor text. Like anywhere where there's text that can be flavorful, it's flavor text. So that can be really small things like even in the menu buttons, or like in Bookworm Adventures, you'd have a monster, and the monster would have like a little quote or something, in their box, and so it's just like, yep, well, that's not a lot. It's just like 10, 15 words per monster, but you got like 150 monsters, so you got to write all those. Somewhere along in there, this would have been maybe a couple of years. I uh, I ended up writing all the almanac entries for the original Plants vs Zombies, and that was like it took probably less than a week of writing, but it was just like, and that turned out to be the stuff that I did that by far the most people ever saw. Um, and then so I was spending a lot of time like writing flavor text for games, Talismania, Feeding Frenzy, any game that had like a story or anything. I would be writing the majority of that stuff. I'd be writing the readmes. How do you remember those?
That's
Like
right.
every
That's
game you would
right.
download would have a readme, like just a text file that nobody
You became a
expected to.
technical writer as well
Yeah, but I
as
was
the
like
flavor.
being a technical writer. I was fulfilling the terms of my visa by writing these technical documents. And then at one point, it was like, okay, I'm going to write a real technical document. I'm going to write a Peggle. At that point, Peggle had come out, and I'd written, all the text in Peggle, or pretty much all of it. And then I wrote a instruction manual on how to use the Peggle level editor. How
That's
to,
right. Yeah,
yeah,
that was good. That
how to
helped a
make a
lot of people
Peggle
get into
level
it.
in dozens of easy steps.
Yeah.
And so, so I wrote this thing, and of course, in the course of writing it, I learned how to use the Peggle level editor. And so that meant that when Peggle Knights came around, I ended up designing like at least half or a third of the levels for Peggle Knights. And
I have to. I want to interject here just for people to kind of understand what it was like being on the outside of this kind of you kind of growing into these positions and doing this. You brought your character yourself, your person, Steve, into the office to be
yeah,
around the rest of us plebes, and you're thinking these characters and you're thinking this funny stuff, and you've got this going in your head all the time, and you're just kind of exuding this from your character. And I feel like it brought a lot of life to just all the developers and designers and the QA and the business around as well. It felt like the soul of PopCap had kind of was starting to like flower and bloom and become this thing, and I feel like it brought us together in that sense and made it all a lot of fun. It really started to kick in kind of the family vibe around that. I don't know what it was like from your perspective, but you definitely had like that kind of impact. And I don't think it was really like apparent at first. It just grew into that, and I was just kind of thinking that listening to you tell your story about
well,
all this.
I
It
mean,
was like,
that's a very kind of you to say. I mean, I certainly agree that it was a very involving and felt very like family like and community. It's like, yep, I'm a PopCap partisan. Like I'm
mhm,
PopCap
mhm.
through and through. I'm a company man, and I would not necessarily. I didn't use this term, but others did. Of like, Steve, you're the voice of PopCap, right? And in a way, I was, right. Like, I mean, I would always
Absolutely
try to
was,
sort of
yeah.
tailor the voice of each game to that game, but in terms of just the overall writing approach, when it's just like, okay, I always sort of saw it like Peggle was a really great example of something where it's like this is going to be so family friendly that it kind of almost goes all the way around and becomes insane. Uh, it's
It
like
can be that friendly.
yeah, like it's so family friendly and squeaky clean that it's a little nuts. Uh, and so that was very much what I was sort of trying to do for Peggle. And it was such an interesting thing to sort of like, I mean, obviously Peggle's one of my favorite games ever. I'm a little surprised that looking back, I go like, it truly is one of the greatest games ever made. And yet it doesn't quite have that same level of cultural, you know, uh,
Doesn't
familiarity.
permeate quite
Yeah,
as much
yeah.
as other. Yeah,
Permeation,
yeah.
even though it's like, wow, it's an incredibly good game. Um, and so just to sort of kind of wrap up my PopCap tale, I guess, is that I worked a ton on Peggle, then Peggle Knights. I was very much in the Peggle branch, right? Because then from then it was Peggle 2, which you and I worked on for a while. And then Peggle Blast, which was like the mobile version of
Oh,
Peggle.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
And that was where I would be like flying down to San Francisco for like a week, a month. Every month I would go for a week to hang out with the team in San Francisco that was doing Peggle Blast, make levels for them and do writing and blah, blah, blah. And then eventually shipped that. That would have been like 2015, 16 or so. And then eventually landed on the PVZ2 team. So by that time, obviously PVZ1 had come out, like a long time ago, and PVZ2, which had a lot of struggles in getting out, it too eventually came out, which I always sort of observed kind of off to the side. It was like, oh, the PVZ2 people eventually made PVZ2, and PVZ2 came out, and it went on, as a mobile game, and it was going and going and going, and eventually
Yeah.
after all the
Still ticking along.
it
It seems
still
like.
is. It still is. And so, yeah, eventually, after kind of wrapping up all this different Peggle stuff, I landed on the PVZ2 team. Uh, and that's where I was pretty much just until eventually in 2022, I decided to leave and pursue other interests.
So what? So how many years total are we
Well,
talking
I
here?
think it was 17. I started in April of 2005. And
Folks, that is amazing. In the
yeah, it's
games
pretty
industry, that is
crazy.
amazing.
Started
As
in
I was talking
2000
about
and
the layoffs.
yeah, yeah. Well, and you got, I mean, you and I both watched many waves of layoffs sort of sweep up and then sweep back into the ocean, carrying many people off into the depths. And it would happen over and over and over again. But yeah, incredibly. So again, I started in April or May of 2005, and I left EA. And of course, in there, and we're going to talk eventually end up talking about this later, but the buyout is a huge moment in PopCap history. Um, but many years after the buyout, I left. I think, again, it would have been in April of 2022, I think now. Yeah,
Mhm.
2022. So that would have been 17 years. As far as I know, I still hold the title. It may not be quite right, but I think at the time that I left, I held the title for longest continuous employee of
Yeah,
PopCap.
yeah.
Like way longer than any of the founders who took their packages and left like a decade before I did. Like I
Well,
just
that's
hung on forever and ever because I liked the work and I was like a PopCap company man the whole way through. It's like I love PVZ too, damn it! And I'm gonna do everything I can to push PVZ forward. And even as we'll get into this in future episodes, but even as the entire corporate culture and everything about it transformed into unrecognizability.
hmm hmm
But it was still good for a
Yeah, that's
paycheck and a good one.
you could remain as the soul of the company, as the soul of that that IP and those product lines. Like yeah, it's you get to be that until you don't feel like being that anymore. It kind of seemed like and
Well,
that's how it went. 17 years. I clocked 7.5 years, so you're literally just about 10 years more time there
I
than I
definitely
put
felt
in.
like a mutant in the sense that like
How is he
everything.
doing this? He's still
Well,
alive.
but I would just look around in like this is sort of my experience in the video game business, and I would look around and like absolutely everyone else would come somewhere, work for maybe 2 or 3, maximum 5 years, and then go somewhere else and get a big pay bump and a big job bump. But I was
hmm
just like, I don't care. I like PopCap and I like our games, and I'm happy to just sit here in the trenches and just do what I can to make these games as good as I can, or help make them be as good as they can be.
Totally,
Um,
totally.
and in a sense, that kind of bit me in the ass. I think if I'd probably pushed harder for more options and stuff like that, I'd be in a more secure place now. But that's a story for another time. So yeah, basically, I think that's like a decent overview for the listeners as to who I am and why I'm half of this podcast. So yeah, that is my PopCap story. So now we can move on to the main meat of the episode. Isaac, why is this happening? why are we doing
What are
this
these guys
podcast
doing?
in the first place? What is our goal? Why do we think anybody cares?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's we, in recent times have been asked to give little interview clips for kind of bigger studies of what went on at PopCap and what's gone on with Plants vs Zombies and things like that. And then even since then, we've kind of been looking around YouTube and places and found a lot of people still talking about PopCap games and what went on there, and just kind of probing into it. And it seemed like there's a lot there. There's a lot to talk about. A lot went on, and it was a really interesting ride because in a relatively short amount of time, we went from a small crew of 20 some odd people to being hundreds and hundreds of people, having studios in China and in Ireland,
Ireland,
and
yeah.
and just became a huge family really fast. And it was there's a time I would come into the kitchen like on a Monday morning, there'd be one or two new people. I swear it was like every week for a while. It was just constantly this influx of new people, and it was an amazing experience and the idea was always to kind of push and push until we either go public or sell to a bigger entity. That was never a hidden fact or a mystery or anything. Like we're trying to go big here, and there were big investors. And it's also, I think, important in all of that. Everyone's kind of got a different story, and we've seen a few of those kind of like stories a little bit out there online from different perspectives and different people. And I think as we're doing this, we kind of want to respect and bring up, like, not, it wasn't this amazing golden beautiful ride to the top for everybody. And even with us, there were a lot of difficulties and things that went on, and it was not necessarily easy. And some people would not say it was a wonderful adventure. They would probably say that it got pretty rough here and there. And I think it's important that all of that is understood. It was, and that's also kind of what is going to be interesting about a podcast series about this. I think is that we can interview some folks that are going to have different perspectives on it that are still our friends. We're all still friends, a lot of us
Right.
anyway.
Well, and
And
yeah, I mean, I'll say that like at least for me, I've sort of noticed, and we've talked about this, where it's like there has been this kind of weird resurgence of interest in old school PopCap. Not just like, a lot of it has to do with like PVZ in particular, because that has turned out to be kind of the enduring legacy of PopCap.
mhm,
Uh, but like there was a video somebody put together like a couple of months ago of all the pop strips that I had drawn for the newsletter that I talked about. Like,
right.
one of the things I did for the newsletter was draw these little newspaper cartoons of all the characters from PopCap, just as a part of the newsletter thing. And I did several dozen of those, and somebody who probably was possibly not even born when I was making them, uh, got them all together and made a YouTube video out of it.
It's
And
amazing.
and
I
and
love that.
there were people who were interested in it, and maybe there was, by now I can't remember, it was like 3, 4, possibly even 5 years ago, there was that lengthy um kind of where behind the scenes documentary about PopCap, and we'll put
Uh-huh.
links to all these stuff in the description for the video. But yeah, but it's just sort of like, this is a 3-hour documentary where they interviewed a ton of different people about PopCap, and I never thought that I would be like watching a 3-hour documentary about PopCap and come away from it thinking they didn't even scratch the surface. Like they didn't even like they barely,
Same.
and so it's now obviously of course we're from it and in it, and so we have like a very particular kind of view of it, but I
Mhm.
think it's not crazy to think that there is something to talk about. Now, one of the things you mentioned, Isaac, was that like this is like you still have dreams about PopCap.
This is true. Yeah, it's weird. I've worked at a lot of jobs, a lot of different places, on a number of different games since I left PopCap. I left in 2012, around April or May, somewhere in there, and I don't dream about any of those other jobs. I don't, but I swear, probably twice a month, I will wake up in the morning and I will have just been like, I have this dream where I just got my job back at PopCap and I was walking around, somewhere on the eighth floor, that same old, just the ugliest building in Belltown with the most beautiful people inside of it. Trying to find people that I recognize, trying to find people that I know, and wondering what I'm going to work on, and just feeling excited and just like, I'm back with the family kind of feeling, and then I'll wake up and be like, that was awesome, but that totally didn't happen, and
Or it
it's
did
weird.
happen,
Yeah, I mean,
but yeah, in dream form. But you're
yeah.
right. I mean, I certainly because I mean, like for me as a creator, because I'm a cartoonist and I've been drawing my own cartoon for 30 odd years. So like the way I look at it is like I'm perfectly capable of doing stuff completely on my own. I draw my comic by myself. I publish it myself. I put the books together. It's like just me, my thing, and I'm good enough at it. But what was so great about coming to PopCap was being able to just dive into the joy of collaborating with people. Like just
Mhm.
going, oh man, like there are so many smart, talented, funny, interesting people. Like no one at that office was like when you think about sort of like stories about corporate offices are just sort of like oh generic office guy, but like there was no generic office person. Like every single person was a very distinct weirdo from every other
Yeah,
person, right?
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
and
And
so
and real people you could really be friends with, and it loved working with and admired, there's a lot of that there.
and just the joy of like I could never have created book any of these games by myself, right? I mean, and but it was just awesome to go like, but I can contribute to it. I can add
Mhm.
to it, like whether I'm just adding text, or like I'm actually helping to build it. I'm helping to create the levels for it. I'm helping to do this or that, or like Bookworm Adventures 2, was like, okay, at this point, now I'm actually contributing the entire story of it, which, like in the first one, Tyson had sort of built out the majority of the story and I just wrote jokes. But the second one was like, okay, now this time, the responsibility of creating the entire story and figuring out, like, what are all the enemies going to be? What is the entire game? What is every single monster that you fight going to be? Was my responsibility. But of course, again, and I was happy to do it. And it was great fun to do. But of course, I could never have done the entire game by myself. And every other person involved was bringing their own passion, their own ability, their own interest and skills and so on to making stuff that none of us could have made by ourselves.
And working hard, I would say too. That was another thing that I could say about PopCap, especially in all those early years, is everyone was really committed. I think that we felt like a big family in a lot of cases, and there was family drama like there is, but really the core of it, I think, probably why there's any drama is because we all really gave a shit about the job, and we really cared about the games we're working on, and by extension cared about each other, and that. And where we were at too is really interesting. We're in really close to the downtown of a city, and so when you walk out of the building, there's all these restaurants and pubs and places all around. And in the years that we were there, we got to know and be friends with all the people in the rest of the Belltown community and the places that we'd frequent. And there were times like on a Friday night, you could walk to a couple different bars around town and find people that you're working with throughout the day, like sitting bellied up to a bar or something. It was, but usually just one. But there were it was all over the place, and so the sense of community was really huge too. I think unlike a lot of other game jobs, there is a sense of you're doing something that's being successful. You are being successful. You have community and you have the backup of a lot of people around you. and you're the backup for them. You have responsibility to, to pull your weight and do your thing and be awesome, and you will be celebrated because of it. And we all were maybe celebrated too much in some cases, I think, because
Well,
it,
yeah,
it got it got
yeah.
pretty silly sometimes. But that was just the spirit of it. Like the whole idea of a lot of PopCat games is to like push it as far as you can with ridiculousness, and then just go twice that far into ridiculousness, and just really blow things out. And I think our company culture was like that too. It was pretty wild and,
Yeah, I
and a
was
lot of
like
fun.
whenever I would be working on something where you're sort of in a position of sort of like say prototyping a game and you're trying to work out the basic mechanics of it, and you're kind of like moving sort of knobs and twiddling levers. There's a very common thing to go like, this isn't quite right. Let's like turn it another 10%. But I would always go like, okay, let's just double it, and
Yeah.
like let's go, or like let's just go way over the line, and
Hmm.
then we'll have a better, rather than sort of inching towards the line. And a lot of times when you would do that, when you go way over the line, you go like, whoa. That is actually, I didn't. There's something here that we didn't even expect, and so let's just keep going. And again, we would just it was like a really crazy experience, and especially one, as you know, now that I've left and now that I look back on that older period, that golden era, where it's like it's a rare thing, right? Like it's, I
Hmm.
mean, and speaking to other PopCap people, I think we all really appreciate that this is something that not everybody gets a chance to participate in, something where everyone really is like brought together in a belief in something sort of bigger than ourselves and something we can all contribute to, and that binds us together. And as you say, like this sense of community within the walls of PopCap, and that sort of also spilled out to some extent into the surrounding neighborhood, right? Like Belltown and
Hmm.
stuff like
Hmm.
that. And so, and ideally, I mean, it's not necessarily the case that if a company is a good place to work, that means the products they make are also good. But in this instance, I would like to believe that it's like, well, we just, our core thing was always like, well, let's just make games that we want to make. Like, let's
Hmm.
make games
Hmm.
that we enjoy playing, and that, like the way back at the beginning, Jason said, they're games for your mom. Make a game
Yeah.
that your mom could appreciate. And if it's like, but that just sort of leads you to go, okay, well, we are just trying to focus on what is fun, what's enjoyable about these games, and that doesn't mean that every single game like hit the mark. And and as time went on, the way that PopCap made decisions about what games to move forward with and what ones not to certainly changed. But at least in that kind of golden era that we're talking about, there was just this sort of exuberant, like we get to make games, and a big part of it, obviously a huge part of it, had to do with what I was talking about earlier, that kind of that money fountain. It was just
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
Bejeweled just kept making money. It just kept
Yeah.
paying
Yeah.
all of our paychecks. It just, people kept buying it, and so it kept providing for all these other people to come from all these sort of different other places to just go, okay, let's make some more games.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that was just a really remarkable experience, and one that I now, and like I think I appreciated it at the time, but looking back, going, wow, that was actually some more rare than than I knew, right?
Truly, yeah, yeah. It's and I think that the scope of the games, the size of the like small casual games, gave us a certain amount of momentum that in a lot of cases you didn't see in other game studios. A lot of other game studios, they'd work on a game for 3 or 4 years sometimes, and it was just this agonizing, just trudging overtime, fest that it just seemed like it would never end. Where PopCap, we didn't work much overtime. There
Well,
was, I mean, we would just like we would, on a Friday go out and have some drinks or whatever, or on any night of the week, really, and then sometimes come back to the studio and work on stuff just because it's fun to work on it,
yeah, because you just like,
and
oh,
put.
I had this great idea. I want to go back and just do this stuff before I forget it, or whereas like again during the time we were there, and outside of that time as well, like a very common thing in the world of video games is this idea of crunch,
Hmm.
right? where it's just like all hands, like everybody has to put in like 80-hour weeks. You're
Yeah, we're
just
catering
there,
in
just like,
food. You can sleep on your
and that
desk.
can go on for months and months and months as all these
Hmm.
people struggle to get some game, some big or maybe even not so big games ready for some predetermined launch date, and just burn everybody out. And then again, like very common in the video game business to crunch and crunch and crunch and then just fire everybody once the game comes out. It's like,
Yeah.
so like the video game business being as kind of insanely cutthroat as it can be, it just is such a weird thing. I mean, and I'm very blessed to kind of go, my sole experience in the video game business was at this place in which we actually made games, I think, for the right reasons, and we did it the right way. We didn't do stupid kind of self-destructive things like let's burn out all our employees and then fire them. Like, now that's not to say that
In a
PopCap.
nutshell, that is
Yeah.
very, very good in a nutshell way to put it. And uh, yeah, like we didn't have the huge development cycles. We didn't have a need to go into any kind of crunch time. Every once in a while, leading up to a release, I think maybe we'd put in a couple extra hours here or there. But like I said, and then sometimes we just voluntarily do that, just almost as like a reflex to having fun with the stuff we're working on. But it was never like you have to work these hours. Um,
Yeah, it was
and
just a real kind of common enthusiasm. And so this is sort of, again, this is all in the context of like, why are we doing this podcast and why should anyone care, is
Mhm.
like, well, ideally, in this episode and in episodes to come, we'll be able to just sort of at least model like, this is how a functioning game company works, right? Like a company that's actually doing, and not just a game company, but a company period. Like there are methods and practices, and like this is what it looks like on the inside when things are going well. Now, we will also have some stories about what it's like when things aren't going so well, because
Absolutely,
PopCap
yeah.
was certainly not immune to that. But yeah, so we were sort of lucky to be there at that time. But I believe, Isaac, you had kind of a last thing you really wanted to get at.
One thing that I feel like it will be interesting to convey through a series of these podcasts is also what it's like to be at a company that is just constantly growing and rising like that and hitting this crescendo and selling and being bought up by a much bigger entity. It's a really it's an interesting experience. There's a lot of stuff that went into it behind the scenes that we don't know about. There's a lot of stuff that we caught wind of. There's a lot of things that we experienced directly,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's kind of put us in a spot where we can, if we were to a new company now that was similar to PopCap, it makes it so we can see things coming from a ways off, like probably wouldn't be able to, if we hadn't been through that. I think it's worth conveying while we're still alive and it's still in our brains.
To just get
That
some of that stuff out there, yeah.
yeah,
Well,
to get
and
some of that
because
out there.
the way I look at it is like the story of PopCap is like a roller coaster of a very particular shape.
Hmm.
And so we could do our part to kind of like elucidate that shape and kind of like, oh, the rising and then the crescendo and then the like the ups and the downs and all that sort of stuff. It's just got a very particular, somewhat, I mean, not complete, like there have been other success stories in the world besides PopCap,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
but
Yeah,
and other rises and falls, but this is our story, and it's an interesting one, and there's a lot of cool stuff that's happened in it. So sorry, I did kind of interrupt. I didn't want to make sure
no,
that
that was
is that
that's absolutely true. Yeah, that's a great way to
so
kind of wrap some of that up.
yeah. So then, as our listeners, as I hope you guys can all see or hear, we're not crazy. Like we actually do have stuff to talk about. This PopCap does have a reason to exist. So, what can we look forward to in future episodes of the unofficial PopCap PopCast?
More tongue twisters if possible. We're going to see how many of those we can work in there, and then try to get our adoring listeners to repeat them after us. No, there's. I think we've kind of talked about covering some of the stuff that people really want to hear about first. Like the buyout,
Yep, yep.
working on early versions of PVZ and Peggle and Bejeweled and what what that was like, and kind of what I think some of this is going to be interesting to get into, just kind of like game design theory and game design. What is what is designed by committee? What is too many cooks in the kitchen? What is a domineering overlord? There's kind of there are a lot of things to cover when you talk about in these games, and in a lot of cases there were different teams that worked on a lot of these different games, so there would be different things that would come out of it, and we use different tools. So we'll have episodes where we talk about kind of the internal, like the workings of it as it was back then. Again, pre-EA, so there's nothing EA going on whatsoever here. This is just kind of how things were kind of put together, and so we'll talk about that. And we've talked about having interviews with a number of the key players that we worked around back then, because we do still all talk once in a while. Sometimes it won't be for a year or two, but we'll have get-togethers and meet up with a bunch of friends. And I think there's a lot of folks that would like a chance to tell their story from their angle and have that kind of out in the world. Obviously, we have to be kind of careful about how we approach some of this. We don't, want to call out anybody by name who doesn't want to be or anything like that. There might bleep some of this out. I don't know, but we'll figure it out as we go along. The goal here really is to just share the love of working at this glorious place, and hopefully provide some insights into how it was done, and how on multiple levels, not just the game design, but how a company is run.
I mean, I've got lots of
interact.
Yeah, like I want to talk about like game writing, like really get into a deep dive about what it is like to actually write for games, and like some of the sort of weird, interesting aspects of that people might not be sort of evident when you're just coming to a game and looking at it, but like some of the considerations you have to make when you're writing for a game as opposed to something like a play or a book or a movie or a TV show. It's like the very different kind of thing, right? So. And then, interviews. We're going to see if we can grab something else. Also, of course, when we post this first episode, we're going to try to simulpost as a podcast as well as a YouTube video. And the YouTube, I'm not sure if there's comments for podcasts, but for YouTube, if any of you listeners out there have questions for us, please put them in the comments, and we will probably either ignore them or answer them in the comments, or we may go, that's a great question, let's do like a viewer mail thing and answer that in, or maybe like every episode we'll answer viewer questions. So we're very interested in any questions that you folks might have to ask us, and we'll answer them as best as we can.
All right. And as with all types of videos on YouTube, we would really like you to subscribe and like and comment and all of that stuff that you hear all the other podcasters talk about. And it tells us also that, hey, people like this and want to hear more about this kind of insider take on some of the stuff that happened way back when. We love talking about it. And if you love hearing about it, please kind of support us in that sense. And we'll just keep going. We'll just keep talking and talking and talking. And,
until the stars in the sky turn black. Yeah, well, we should probably come up with a snappy exit phrase, but in its absence, this has been the very first episode of the Unofficial PopCap PopCast. See you soon.
Oink.